My name is Lydia, 38 years old, a colonel in the military, once directly in command of numerous high-level classified operations. But that afternoon in my mother's kitchen in Alabama, beneath the slow whirl of the ceiling fan and the faint smell of lemon from the sink, my stepfather yanked the phone from my hand, handcuffed me in front of my mother and pulled a gun to my temple. "Who do you think you are, giving orders in my house?" he growled. I was on a secure line with the White House. And he had just crossed my final line. What he didn't know was, I had started recording before I even stepped through the door. Have you ever been insulted by someone who never stopped calling you family? Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, only to be treated like the enemy in your own home? Leave a comment if you've ever known that feeling. Tap like if you believe silence is not weakness. And make sure to subscribe, because when 5 black SUVs pulled up to the house, the truth finally began to show its face. I didn't let the agents take him in. Harold stood frozen, sweat soaking through his dark shirt, his hands stiff at his sides as if bracing for the usual response: shouting, tears, fear. But I said just one sentence slowly and clearly: "I want to handle this my way." They stared at me for a moment. The man in the black suit, earpiece in his ear, gave a slight nod, then signaled the team to withdraw. The SUVs slipped away as if they had never been there. I didn't look back at Harold. I simply picked up the phone that had flown across the kitchen, wiped the grime from the screen and slipped it into my pocket. Then I climbed the stairs, one step at a time, listening to the creak of the old wood beneath my feet, like it was whispering something long buried. My old bedroom hadn't changed. The same faded floral curtains my mother had hung when I was in high school. The same wooden bed frame curved at the headboard, handmade by my father when I turned 8. I walked to the mirror on the wall. It looked ordinary, dulled by time, the wooden frame slightly cracked on one side, but I knew what was hidden inside. No one else in this house had ever dared touch it. I removed the mirror from its hooks with both hands, as carefully as if I were unhooking a piece of memory. Behind it was a hollowed-out section, carved with a utility knife, by my own hand, during a short leave 3 years ago. Inside was an old black tin box, sealed tight with electrical tape. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the box. Inside were 2 mini cameras, spare batteries, and a high-capacity memory card. I had used them to record every time Harold lost his temper, every night my mother walked out of the bedroom with red eyes, every time he raised his voice and then disappeared into his study like nothing had happened. I inserted the memory card into my personal laptop, encrypted with internal military software I had installed on only 2 devices. The screen lit up and one by one the audio files appeared, each clearly marked with date and time. One file captured Harold's growl in the living room. "If you ever open your mouth about this again, I swear my buddies at the department will take care of you. You really don't want me dragging your face through the Rotary Club, do you?" Another: "I can fake paperwork faster than you think, Marilyn. I could have you declared mentally unstable. Don't test me." I bit my lip lightly, my fingers trembling over the keyboard, not out of fear, but because I knew I was right not to let him think I'd forgotten. A soft knock at the door. I closed the screen immediately. My mother stood outside, not looking in, her forehead resting on the doorframe. "Do you need anything, Lydia?" I paused, then replied gently, "No, Mom. Just going through a few old things." She hesitated. "He wasn't always like this. You know that." I didn't answer. She walked away, her steps heavy, as if even the floor was tired of holding her up all these years. I reopened my laptop. This time I transferred every recording onto an external hard drive, encrypted it, and hid it under a decoy folder name. I printed a full list of the recordings, each one detailing a threat, an insult, a time Harold crossed the line between man and power. I looked at my bed, the place I used to cry as a girl, listening to my mother weep through the walls. Those memories didn't paralyze me anymore. Now they were data. Evidence. I wasn't planning revenge. Revenge traps people in pain. I wanted light. I wanted him to stand exposed in the truth with nowhere left to hide. I opened the drawer of my old desk. Inside was a leather-bound notebook I'd used back at the military academy. I flipped to a blank page and wrote the first line. Objective: bring the truth to light. Not with a weapon. With what he once used to silence others. Systems. Law. Silence broken. I closed the notebook. Placed it next to the military badge I hadn't worn on my shoulder that afternoon. Then I looked into the mirror, not to check my reflection, but to see clearly the woman he could no longer control. I had always suspected my military record had been tampered with, but I never imagined the edits were made by someone once so close to my father. That man was Robert Mason, my dad's childhood best friend, now Harold's closest ally in the local veterans group. What seemed like a bond of trust turned out to be a mask for something far darker. One afternoon, while digging through old family records in a rusted file cabinet, my phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed. No name, just cold digits. I answered cautiously. Lydia. The voice oozed with veiled threat. If you keep digging, everything about your father will be exposed. I scanned the room, made sure no one was listening, then said, "What do you mean?" "I want the truth, not intimidation." The call cut off. The chill lingered, but so did my resolve. The next morning, I drove to the old storage unit my father once used to keep important documents. Dust clouded the room. Sunlight streaked through the slats in the wooden windows. I sifted through thick folders page by page, hoping for something, anything. That's when I found the yellowed envelope, no postmark, just scrawled across the front. For Lydia. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter in faded black ink. Hurried but grave. My dear daughter. If you're reading this, it means you've begun to see the shadows I once tried to hide. Harold is not the man you should have known as a father. He has crossed a line, and it affects more than just your mother. If you wish to preserve this family's dignity, don't dig too deep. Could destroy everything. Stay strong. Dad. I sat in silence, heart heavy with grief and fury. Part of me wanted to stop. But the other part, fierce and clear, pushed forward. That letter was like a shard of broken mirror, reflecting a truth I hadn't dared face. I recalled the stories my father told me of Robert Mason, the friend he trusted like a brother. And now, the very man I once looked up to was working with Harold to destroy my reputation and my career. I contacted a few former military colleagues, people who had served with my father and me. They remembered Robert showing up unannounced, prying into my records and strange, unexplained changes in military files. My private investigation had started as a quiet ripple, but now it was pulling me into the deep currents of long-buried family secrets. But this time I wasn't alone. I believed light always overcomes darkness. And justice never sleeps. The photos taken of me at confidential meetings. The deleted emails. And now, my father's unsent letter. Each was a piece of the puzzle I needed to complete the full picture of what had really happened. I took a deep breath, folded the letter, and carefully slipped it into my coat pocket. Every step I took from that moment forward wouldn't just be a battle against Harold or Robert. It would be a fight to preserve myself and my father's legacy. And I was ready to face it all. I stepped through the doors of the old church, the chill of the autumn afternoon slipping through my coat. Pale light from the stained glass windows spilled onto the marble floor in streaks of color, like signs of faith. This was where my father had spent years serving the community, helping those in need as if they were his own family. I came here searching for answers hidden within the walls he once called sacred. My footsteps halted when I saw an elderly woman kneeling at the altar, her hand gently resting on a yellowed Bible. Her silver-white hair reminded me of winter clouds, and though her face was kind, it held the weariness of time. Her eyes settled on me with a flicker of recognition. "Lydia, is that you, dear?" Her voice was soft, cracked with emotion. I nodded, my heart quickening. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Lydia. Did you know my father?" She let out a sigh, then gave a bittersweet smile. "I know more than you think. Harold, he's done things most people wouldn't believe. I know what he did to your mother. But he had control, over more than just the police, even over this very parish council." I looked at her, trying to keep my composure. "Why did you stay silent all these years? Why didn't anyone ever tell us the truth?" She looked down, her eyes glassy. "You may be surprised to hear this, but I was once Harold's lover. We were in love once. But then one night he lost his temper, and I lost my baby." I reached for her hand, feeling her faint but meaningful grip. "Please. Tell me everything." She inhaled deeply as if unlocking a door long sealed shut. "Lydia, he wasn't just a cold man, he had a rage he couldn't control. I trusted love, but in a single fit of fury he did something I could never forgive." He paused, then continued. "I was carrying his child. But one evening after an argument he struck me. I lost the baby right here in this very church. This is where my son used to come to pray. Since then, I've been afraid to speak. He used his power and intimidation to silence everyone. I sat frozen, each word of hers slicing deeper into my chest. You couldn't endure it any longer? Why did you keep helping the community but not protect yourself? Her tired smile returned. Because I believe in God and that faith can heal even the worst wounds. But I was also afraid that speaking up would hurt more people. Harold wasn't just a husband. He had influence far beyond that. My chest tightened. Can you help me? I need the truth to come out. She looked at me, her eyes deep with something almost divine. You already have your own strength, Lydia. But truth must be brought to light one step at a time. If you need anything, come here. I'll always be here to listen. I nodded, feeling a small weight lift. Before I left, I looked around the church. Once a sanctuary for my family, now a witness to the fragments we never dared name aloud. Mrs. Brenner held my hand one last time before she walked away, leaving me with a fragile but steady sense of resolve to continue. I left Alabama carrying a burden that felt heavier but a resolve that burned brighter. I returned to Washington, D.C. under strict security clearance. The red-eye flight was silent, just me and a mind racing with unanswered questions. When I landed, everything around me looked the same: busy streets, glowing skyscrapers, but inside I felt as frozen as ice. At the Pentagon's secure entrance, I was escorted to a small conference room deep inside the building. The soft lighting and quiet space helped me focus on what was ahead. That was when I met Lieutenant General Madeline Clark, an imposing woman with sharp eyes and a calm, near-frigid presence. She was the one directly assigning me this mission, and the one who would help bring Harold into the light. Lydia, General Clark began, her voice flat but authoritative. We've been monitoring the situation for a while. But now Harold's interference has crossed the line. I nodded, doing my best to remain composed as my heart raced. He's not just a strict stepfather. There's something much bigger. And I need your help. She placed a thick dossier in front of me, pages highlighted and marked in red. Harold tampered with the witness protection list in a highly sensitive military data breach case. He's used his position and connections to cover up misconduct and intimidate anyone who tried to speak out. I flipped through the file. Numbers, names, dates. Every detail painted a complex web Harold had orchestrated with meticulous precision. He didn't just threaten my family, I said bitterly. He's part of a corruption network protecting criminals. General Clark held my gaze, her face graver than ever. You're not just a victim, Lydia. You're the last thread he hasn't managed to cut. Without you, the evidence vanishes, like vapor. The pressure was immense, but with it came a new kind of strength. I'm ready, I answered, my voice steady. I won't let him silence anyone else. She nodded and pulled up a video on the laptop. Footage of Harold speaking with a senator under investigation for accepting bribes to bury violations in a military data project. This is a smoking gun, she said. But without your cooperation, we can't make it public. I sat in silence, absorbing every detail. The glances, the gestures, the language. It all revealed schemes and manipulation. It reminded me of all those nights my mother cried alone, held captive by Harold's control. We need a solid plan, I said, to protect my mother and everyone else he's hurt. General Clark offered a faint smile. You've faced danger before. This is your final battle, and I believe you can win it. We outlined the next steps, gathering more evidence, validating data, and most importantly, protecting the witnesses who had once stayed quiet out of fear. I knew then that bringing Harold to justice wasn't just my personal mission. It was a duty to everyone who'd ever been silenced by someone like him. The meeting ended and I stepped outside, taking a deep breath. The DC night still shimmered with lights, but I was ready to confront the darkness that had long hidden beneath that glow. Each step on the sidewalk felt like a vow. I would never let anyone turn truth into silence again. I returned to my mother's house after 3 days in DC, carrying a thick sealed file in my coat pocket and a whirlwind of thoughts I hadn't yet sorted. My mother didn't ask anything when she saw me walk through the door. She just looked at me for a long time, her gaze quiet, as if she already knew I had seen more than I was ready to tell. I said nothing. I just nodded and went straight upstairs. That night, as darkness fell and the house settled into its usual fake quiet, I sat alone in the living room, where my father used to play his old radio next to the bookshelf every weekend. The radio didn't work well anymore, but I kept it as a surviving piece of memory. I placed my hand on the dial and turned it gently. After a few moments of static and fuzz, a familiar melody unexpectedly came through, the sound of silence. The voice flowed from the worn speaker, pulling me back to a time when I used to sit on the wooden floor listening to my father explain encryption principles, teaching me how the simplest things could hide the most critical truths. He used to say, "When the world tries to silence you, learn how to make silence speak." I opened the battery compartment at the bottom of the radio. Wedged between two old batteries was a small piece of paper, folded 3 times with a simple black ink symbol on the outside. I sat down and opened it. It was a short code, written in an old cipher system my father had taught me during our earliest training sessions. Letters replaced with numbers, numbers with symbols. To outsiders it looked meaningless. But to me it was full of clues. It took me about half an hour to decode the message. Each character emerged from layers of logic. M3.RV.NSTC, 78, access. File, 112C, confirmed. My gut told me this wasn't just one of Dad's mental games. I booted up my personal laptop and logged into an old military data analysis interface. The code led me to a hidden folder labeled 112CDT. To access it, I needed a triple-layer password and a voice authentication string. I extracted a clip of my father's voice from an old video stored on my hard drive, then ran it through a sound analyzer to match the vocal pattern. The loading screen ran for 10 seconds. Then the folder opened. Inside was one audio file labeled Harold_Green meetings. My hands turned cold as I put on my headphones and clicked play. Are you sure? If that list falls into the wrong hands. Harold's voice came through, not angry like at home but calm, deliberate. The other voice, deeper and slightly raspy, I recognized it as Senator Victor Tressel, a recently retired political figure. Trust me. I'll change the name of the person we need removed from the Witness Protection Program. In return, I want the chair of the County Police Board. And the funding package for the West Side redevelopment. Clicking glasses. Soft laugh. Then Tressel's voice, clear and firm. You'll get it, Harold. No one needs to know she was ever on that list. Or ever protected. That last sentence took my breath away. He meant me. I rewound the middle part, checking the exchange again. No mistake. Harold had deliberately tampered with the protection system, using his power and political connections to remove my name from internal defense files, essentially erasing my safety net and pushing me into international assignments I was never meant to be sent on if the system had functioned properly. I pulled off the headphones and sat frozen. Every puzzle piece now lay on the table. Harold hadn't just hurt me or my mother. He had orchestrated my exposure to danger, all to trade for status and power. And my father, who must have known, had hidden every bit of evidence in the most ordinary places. An old radio, a childlike cipher, and the song he used to play when I sat curled in his lap. I printed everything out, backed it up onto a separate hard drive, then locked it down with dual biometric encryption. I knew if it leaked, the system would question me. But I also knew that if I didn't act, everything my father had tried to preserve would be meaningless. I folded the printouts and tucked them into my coat pocket, then looked up at the bookshelf, where my father once placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Justice isn't about what's publicly acknowledged. It's what you still do even when no one stands with you." Right then, I knew I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the one holding the trigger. And I was ready. I was in my father's old study, laying out the decoded files, the photos, audio clips, and top-secret documents that, if they fell into the wrong hands, could cost me everything. The desk lamp cast a soft light over the pages, each marked with red notes. The entire web was beginning to show itself. Then I heard soft footsteps. The door opened. It was my mother. She stood at the threshold, holding a steaming cup of tea, but she didn't drink it. She looked at me, not angry but with eyes that made me feel like a traitor. "Lydia," she said gently, voice taut like a drawn bowstring, "why are you doing this?" I looked up from the files, meeting her gaze. "You know why." She shook her head. "He wasn't as bad as you think. He protected me. He was here. You only see what you want to see." I stayed silent for a moment, then calmly opened my laptop. I didn't argue. I just pulled up the recording and pressed play. Harold's voice filled the room, clear, deliberate, and ice cold. "If you speak up again, I swear I'll make sure your daughter loses everything. The military isn't untouchable, Marilyn. All it takes is one signature. Your signature." I watched my mother as the recording ended. She didn't move. The tea in her hand no longer trembled. Only her eyes changed, glossy, then flushed, like something inside her had cracked. I spoke softly, without accusation or sarcasm. "You signed that transfer form, didn't you?" She didn't answer right away. She sat across from me, placed the tea aside, and clasped her hands, trembling slightly. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the watch on my wrist. "He said, if I didn't sign, he'd have you deployed to Syria. Into a no-control zone." Her voice broke. "I've seen photos of fallen soldiers. I couldn't bear the thought. He said if I signed, you'd be reassigned to logistics. It would be safer." I leaned back in my chair. "And you believed him?" I didn't have another choice. I let out a dry laugh, not out of amusement but because it was a line I'd heard all my life. You never have a choice. No choice when he slammed my bedroom door. No choice when he called me ungrateful. No choice when he threatened to kill you if you said anything. But you always had one choice, Mom, me. She said nothing. Just quietly wiped away the tear that had slid down her cheek. I stood up and stepped into the hallway, my heart heavy. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed a moment without the sound of regret echoing in my ears. But just as I reached the kitchen door, a sharp chill crept up my spine, an instinct honed by years of field training. The back door was slightly ajar. I froze in the darkness, my hand instinctively gripping the zipper of my jacket. I was still in uniform, my duty uniform, name tag, chest badge, and rank insignia all clearly visible. On my shoulder, 3 stars shimmered under the broken yellow porch light. I turned. In the backyard, Harold was standing there. He held a handgun, finger resting on the trigger, but his wrist hung low. His eyes locked onto mine, not angry but something else I couldn't place. Confusion, maybe fear. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Only the night wind moved, rustling dry leaves along the old wooden fence. Then he exhaled, lowered the gun. His gaze dropped to my shoulder, where those stars glittered like a blade that severed whatever control he thought he still had. I saw the moment it happened. The grip he had on power dissolved in silence. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten. I just stood there, upright like I was back on parade ground, my eyes steady, unwavering. And that was what made him step back. One step. Then he turned, said nothing, and slipped into the dark like a shadow exiting a stage with no applause left to chase. I walked into the kitchen, locked the door behind me. Mom was still in Dad's old study, hands clenched around a mug that had long gone cold. Her eyes met mine, met the uniform she had avoided for so long, afraid it might drag truth in behind it. I didn't say a word. I unpinned the badge from my chest, placed it gently on the table, and walked out of the room. She didn't call me back. But I knew she had heard. For the first time, she heard with the kind of honesty that fear could no longer shield. That afternoon, sunlight poured onto Maple Street like warm honey spilled over asphalt. White fences were strung with tiny flags and bright pennant banners. The scent of grilled meat, sweet corn, and garlic toast drifted through the air. Laughter echoed from the Hatcher yard, the longtime site of the neighborhood's first summer barbecue. But for as long as I could remember, I had never once stepped inside. Harold always said those gatherings were neighborhood garbage, that those gossiping freeloaders don't pay a dime in taxes to help anybody. And Mom would just smile, roll up a ham sandwich, and say, "It's better eating at home." I was little then, so I believed her. But as I grew, I understood. It wasn't that they didn't want me to go. They were afraid I'd see a kinder world than the one I called home. I stepped into the yard wearing a pale blue blouse, hair pulled back neatly. No uniform. No name tag. Just me, Lydia. A few heads turned. A few eyes blinked slowly, trying to recognize the face in front of them. I spotted Mr. Hatcher by the grill, old leather gloves on, eyes still sharp from his days as a Marine. He set down the tongs, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked over. "Lydia Green," he said my name like a formal greeting. Never thought I'd see the day little Green, the girl with the watchful eyes afraid of being called back home, would stand here, upright like an officer. I smiled. I never thought I'd be invited. He placed a firm, warm hand on my shoulder. You don't need an invitation. You've always belonged here. You just weren't allowed to believe it. I walked toward the main lawn, where folks gathered around a long table of salad and pies. The scent of barbecue mingled with the sound of country music playing from someone's Bluetooth speaker. I stepped up in front of the dessert table, took a breath. "Excuse me," I said loud enough to cut through the music. "My name is Lydia Green. And I'm not staying silent anymore." No one clapped. No one reacted right away. But every head turned, quietly waiting. "I grew up at the end of this street," I said, pointing toward the cream-colored house with the old brick chimney. "The one with the cracked brick behind it. That's where Harold threw a skillet through the window when my mom burned the pancakes." A few chuckles. A few people looked down. I used to think I was the only one who saw it. That I was the only one who heard glass breaking in the night. The only one who heard my mom's shaky breathing after the bedroom door slammed. An older woman by the fruit table nodded gently. I recognized her as Mrs. Langston, the one who walked her dog past our house every morning. But now I know I wasn't alone. "You heard. You saw." A man in a plaid shirt raised his hand. "I saw her, Marilyn, with bruises on her wrist." I asked. She said she bumped into the fridge. I believed her. Maybe I just wanted to believe it so I could sleep better. I didn't blame him. I just nodded. Another voice, Lily, who owned the corner store, spoke up. 3 months ago I saw him grab her by the shoulder behind the church parking lot. She didn't say anything. But I'll never forget her eyes. One by one voices rose. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just truths held too long. Then from the crowd a boy around 10 stepped forward. Eyes bright behind black-rimmed glasses, curls tousled, fingers sticky with barbecue sauce. "You're the lady from the army picture, right?" he asked, voice curious but firm. "You gonna do something?" I knelt down to his level. "Yes, I am. But not just because I'm in the army. Because someone finally has to speak the truth." He nodded, lips pressed together. Then he turned back toward the crowd like his mission was done. A teenager by the lemon pie table had recorded the whole exchange on his phone. I didn't say anything, but he looked at me and asked, "You mind if I post this? People need to hear it." I gave a quiet nod. The video went up on TikTok that night. Within 6 hours, over 2 million views. Thousands of comments. People shared it, not just because of what was said, but because for once, a quiet American street had spoken a name it used to only whisper. My name, Lydia Green. No longer forgotten. No longer the child hiding behind curtains while the world spun past in silence. One weekday morning, I sat in the district courthouse waiting room, hands folded on my lap, eyes fixed on the double wooden doors ahead. No one spoke. No one had to. The air itself felt like it was waiting for the sound of justice long overdue. Harold had been arrested 4 days earlier, right inside the community office where he used to sit with his shiny badge and smug grin. When the federal agents showed up, he didn't resist. He didn't speak. But in his eyes, in the way he scanned the room like he still believed there was a back door, I knew he had never thought it would really come to this. I didn't ask for a lawyer. I didn't file for defamation or sue for wrongful removal. I didn't want money. I didn't want a drawn-out trial. I made 3 demands, clear, firm, non-negotiable. Strip him of the honorary police title. Take down his photo from the council memorial wall. And issue a public apology to my mother in front of the entire county on local television. At first, Harold's defense attorney objected. But once they saw the evidence list, the audio recordings, the barbecue video, handwritten letters, encrypted data from the 112 CDT account, neighbor testimonies, and especially the confirmation letter from Lieutenant General Clark exposing the unauthorized meddling in the Witness Protection Registry, they had nothing left to bargain with. The court agreed. No lengthy trial required. What Harold did was enough for federal charges, but they allowed a plea deal if he complied with every condition I set. I wasn't there when the verdict was read. I didn't need to hear it. I only showed up a week later when the local TV station aired a live broadcast at 6 p.m. I sat in my mother's living room, the TV volume just loud enough to hear. My mother sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly as if in prayer. The room was so silent I could hear the ticking of the wall clock with every beat. The screen shifted to a small studio. The camera slowly panned to Harold, seated on a leather-upholstered wooden chair, a plain backdrop behind him. He wore a white dress shirt, no tie, no badge. His hair had noticeably grayed in just a few days. Beside him sat my mother. Her hair was neatly pinned up, her eyes fixed straight ahead, never looking at him, not even once. The host read a short introduction, then stepped away. The camera zoomed in. Harold took a long, audible breath, like he had to summon all his strength just to speak one simple sentence. My name is Harold Green. I was the county sheriff for 17 years. And I want to apologize. He paused. His eyes lowered to a sheet of paper on the small table. But then he didn't read it. He folded it, set it aside. I'm sorry for using my authority to intimidate and manipulate. I'm sorry for tampering with the military records of my stepdaughter. I'm sorry for making my wife live in fear and silence for nearly 2 decades. His voice cracked. His eyes welled with tears. I felt nothing. Marilyn, he said, turning to my mother. I know this apology can't undo what happened. But I want you to know. I regret it. My mother didn't respond. She kept her eyes forward, as if the screen were a window reflecting a brokenness too familiar to even try repairing anymore. I looked down at my hands. Not because I was emotional, but because in that moment I felt something very clearly. I was no longer the child behind a locked bedroom door, listening to the screams outside, powerless to stop them. When the program ended and the screen faded to a local ad, my mother still hadn't said a word. She stood, walked into the kitchen, retrieved the tea kettle, poured 2 cups, and came back to the living room. You remember, she said, voice steady, your father used to say, some apologies come too late, but still need to be heard. I took the cup. The tea was still warm. I didn't need his apology, I said. I just needed you to know. I didn't stay silent out of fear. I stayed silent because I was waiting for the right moment. She looked at me for the first time in a long while. Not with defensiveness or denial, but with quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted, and that it was time. I took a sip of tea. A faint hint of peach brushed across my tongue. Outside, children's laughter echoed from down the block. A bike rolled past like a river of life, continuing on, waiting for no one. I didn't need a sentence. I just needed the truth to be placed back where it belonged. And today the whole neighborhood heard my name. Not from his mouth, but from the very things he had tried to bury forever. I moved to Boston in mid-October, when the trees along the roads were turning amber and crimson. The city wasn't unfamiliar. I had trained here before, walked these leaf-strewn cobblestone streets, never imagining I'd one day call it home. But now, a 3rd-floor apartment in the quiet neighborhood of Jamaica Plain was where I began again. Not to forget the past, but to place it in its rightful place. The apartment was small but filled with light. Morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, reflecting on the fridge's surface. On that fridge I pinned an old photo, me about 6 years old, wearing a mini uniform my dad had sewn from one of his old jackets. I stood clinging to his leg and he bent down smiling, one hand on my shoulder like a silent vow of protection. That photo had been tucked inside an old notebook my mother returned to me after everything. I didn't ask why she kept it. I just took it quietly, wiped off the dust, gently smoothed the edges, and placed it on the fridge. Every morning as I pass by, I see my father's eyes. Not to hold on to what was lost, but to remind myself of the first person who believed I was strong enough to do what was right, even alone. I started my new job at the office overseeing the internal military victim support program, the division responsible for cases that were forgotten, suppressed, or buried under rank and silence. The work wasn't easy. The people I met carried wounds that didn't show on their skin. But when I looked at them, I saw myself. And they saw me too. Justice begins where people no longer have to hide their pain to be heard. Among the files I was assigned, one folder was flagged as priority. I opened it, reading every line. An 8-year-old girl. The only child of Technical Sergeant Liza Connor, killed in Syria during the final withdrawal. No remaining family. No one willing to adopt. The file read, child exhibits mild depression, trauma-related behaviors. Requires stable environment and guardian with military understanding. I closed the folder and laid my hand over its rough cover. Something stirred inside me, no name for it. I remembered following my father from meetings to the drill field. Remembered my mother's look every time I came home in uniform. Remembered the door that once locked behind me, and all the times I unlocked it alone. That afternoon, I walked into the military family counseling office, where adoption evaluations were processed. A young staffer named Karen handed me the forms. She didn't ask much, but lingered a little when she reached the section on personal motivation. Why do you want to adopt this child? I thought for a moment, then wrote, because I know what it's like to live inside walls of silence. And I know how to help someone find their way out. As I left the office, the sun was setting behind a red brick building. The wind cut across my collar, but I didn't feel alone. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a printed photo from the case file. A little girl with light brown hair, wide eyes, holding a stuffed bear. There was no smile in the photo. But I didn't need one to know I was ready. That night, I brewed a pot of ginger tea and sat by the window cracked open, where the faint sounds of Boston's nighttime traffic flowed like whispers. I opened my laptop and logged a few work notes. In the final line, I typed, "Not every wound can be erased. But we can rewrite how it ends." I looked down at my hands, the same old scars no longer hidden. Each one a record, a promise, a piece of a past that no longer made me bow my head. And if some little girl, quiet behind a wall like I once was, is waiting for someone to reach in first, I'll be the one to open the door. Not for a title. Not for redemption. But because it's time for the houses that once lived in darkness to be lit again. What do you think it means when someone who caused deep harm can kneel and apologize in front of an entire town? Can a late apology really ease years of silence, fear, and loss? And if you were me, would you forgive or would you stay silent the way they once forced you to? Every family has cracks hidden behind smiles and dinner plates. But maybe the most important thing isn't avoiding the breaking. It's choosing how we live after the break. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a feeling long suppressed, share it. I want to hear your story. Leave a comment below so we know that even if we sometimes walk alone, no one is ever truly alone. And if you'd like to keep walking with me through other journeys, stories of family, of loss, of rising again from the very place we were once pushed down, follow the channel. Because sometimes, a voice that feels unfamiliar yet close is exactly what gives you the courage to keep telling your own.